Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about the dataset and how pandas will help us to explore, clean and modify our dataset. Here, as you see, I have an Excel file and I have states in the first column, and the rest of variables, this variable, this variable, this variable, all of them are in the other columns. For each state, we have information. For example, for Alaska, we have percent of graduated on time, percent of a student graduated on time in front of Alaska, and then we have a percent of minority front of that. So this row belongs to this individual state, and same for the other states. All the rows, all the information in this row belongs to, for example, this state. Okay, for each state we have information like percent of high school graduation, percent of minority, region, kindergarten attendance, and teacher qualification. So we have 2 quantitative variables and 3 qualitative variables in this data set. And we already talked about that. We already talked about numerical variable or quantitative variables. Actually, this is region, this is a qualitative, and then another qualitative, another qualitative. If I had an Excel file, by going to file, file, save as, I'm able to choose the format that I want to save as. So by default, Excel worksheet is Excel workbook. It will save as Excel workbook. But if we want comma separated file, we talked about this before, we can save it as comma separated CSV, and the extension will become CSV, and then you can choose the location, right? One thing that years ago when I was working on Excel file and CSV file, one thing that really frustrated me was saving some changes in Excel or CSV file. In CSV file, when you want to save some changes like width of a column, or if you want to highlight even some of the cells, CSV file doesn't save those changes at all. Excel file is the only file that can save highlights, font change, the width of each column, and all this kind of customized changes. CSV cannot. So always be careful. If you are changing your Excel sheet, make sure the file is saved as Excel and it's not saved as CSV, because CSV does not save highlights, font change, or this kind of fancy edits. Yeah, that was my experience from years ago, and then I figured out what's going on and why some of my changes are not saved, because I was over and over saving my files and as CSV, and then when I went back to the CSV file, I wouldn't see all those changes I made. Okay, so now we like to use this data set and learn more about data manipulation and data cleaning. So we use pandas to read this CSV file as a data frame, and data frames are the 2-dimensional labeled data structure with columns of different variables, like similar things as you see here, like a table of content. Okay, so let me close this Excel file. Okay, I don't want to change anything. Okay, So we are working on Note 7, and the video will be video 8. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to copy the path that my data set is saved in, and then I'm going to import pandas. Well, if you remember, I can say import pandas as PD, and then the rest of comments, code I'm writing down, I can use this brief kind of name instead of the whole name pandas. But for now, I'm going to just write down pandas over and over, so you get used to this name and this package. And then later, when we are more expert, more professional, we are going to use a brief name for each of the packages we are using. Okay, so now I'm going to create a data set variable, and then use read underscore c underline csv, and then I'm going to choose the path and file name that I have saved on my computer, and then I'm going to use index column equal to state, and then I'm going to change the column's name, because as you know, some of those columns had a really huge and messy names. I'm going to change that to names, bracket, the first column is a state, and then the second one, I'm going to change this to, oops, what should I use? I should use single or double quotation. Grad percentage, and then how many columns I had? I had 5 columns, right? Actually, I had 5 variables and 1 individual column, in columns for state or individual. Okay, so I already actually wrote down this, so I'm going to just copy paste and not waste your time on this. Okay, see how I am organizing this huge line. So what I did, name was here, right? And at this point I entered, and then at this point also I entered. All of these names are in a separate line now, and nothing will, nothing bad will happen. This is the format that we can use to make our writings, our coding more organized. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to show the oops, what I am doing here, data set. I'm showing the data set to you. Okay, so this is my data set, and all the states and the rest of columns are here. Okay, 3 of them here and 2 of them here. Okay, so this was the way we are reading our data set, right? Okay, so now I'm going to display indices of this data frame by using dot index. Well, let me see. Here I chose index column as a state, right? And index shows the column names for us, all these states for us. If I enter, you will see all the states. So in this way, you can find out what is the name of individuals in the data set. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to display is display columns of this data set. Actually, the name, column's name. How? I'm going to use the variable data set, and I'm using columns. These are all the method that I'm using the dot here, and this method I'm going to display some info or extract some of the information I need about my data set. And then as you see, we are displaying columns name. Next thing, I'm going to display the size of this data set. Simply write down size. So what it shows 250, means the rows multiply to columns. So rows were the number of states, right? I have 50 states and 5 variables. 50 multiplied 5 is total number of elements. Total number of elements. Okay, another is, these are all the useful tools that you can use to get information about your data set, and based on this information you can analyze your data set. Okay, this one shows number of rows, comma, number of columns of your data frame. So again, data frame were two-dimensional array. Okay, so what shape gives us? Rows multiply to the columns. And then another important information is data set dot end time, which tells us the dimension of this data frame, like two-dimensional arrays, right? Later we'll learn about series, and that is one-dimensional array. Well, the kind of silly thing that I am always kind of frustrated by different programming languages or different kind of field of study, even have different notation, different word for the kind of specific things they are using. For example, we call this the dimension of our data set, 50 multiplied 5, and in another programming language we simply write down DIM, and then with DIM we get the dimension of our data set, which is, for example, 50 multiplied 5. This kind of end-time number of arrays and the dimension of arrays is specifically for some of the programming languages like Python. Like these are kind of specific names for this kind of programming languages. We have different kind of names. Okay, so what next is, I'm going to display top rows of the data frame, and I'm going to display the bottom rows of this data frame. Okay, so data set dot head gives us the data set in this form you see, and it shows the top 5 rows. I could choose 10 and it shows 10 of them. I could choose 3 and you will see 3 of them. So this number inside this parenthesis shows the number of rows to be displayed. Next one that I wrote here, data set dot tail, and then now, you know, for example, if I write down 4, it will show 4 last rows in this data set. Okay. Next one, we are going to select a single column from this data set. How? I'm going to write down data set and bracket, and then what I'm going to write down inside this, choosing inside this quotation, choosing one of the columns name, either of them, and then put that here. So if you do this, you will see just one column with all the estates name, the information of this column with all the estates name. Well, please don't get confused. These are all the last 4 estates, and then if you scroll down, you will see them here, right? And then that's why we have 84, 88, 78 in here. Correct? Okay, so another way, actually, let me copy the comment for you here, paste the comment for you here. Okay, so I could use another way too. I could say data set dot this one. This one also will show the same thing, or we can write this one. Okay, so instead of bracket, you're going to just use dot and the name of column. Okay, so now we have a participation question here for you. Let's go back to the first here. Okay, so if I use hyphen here instead of this underscore for column's name, for example, instead of graduate percentage, I write down like this. Instead of that, using hyphen. Instead of this one, if I use hyphen. Okay, so if I do this, now I'm fixing this before I forget. If I go back here and instead of this one, I write down dataset.graduate hyphen and then try to get the information, what happens? So what happens if this is possible or if it's not possible, and why, whatever happens, why that happens, and how you can explain to me the reason behind this. Okay, so what is your participation point again? If I here, instead of column's name, instead of underscore, use hyphen, and then come here and try to extract this column with this name that I changed with hyphen, what happens if I try to extract the information of this column and why this happens, why whatever happens, why that happens, and explain the reason for me. That would be your participation point. I'm going to fix this before anything. Okay, so you have one participation point here. Okay, so next thing I want to show you, showing rows in a data frame. How? I'm going to write down data set bracket 0 to 50, for example. Let's write down 0 to 5. So it shows 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? But all of them are 5 top states. 0 to 5 are indexed. Are indices, actually, indices. Okay, so I could write down, let's print them so I can put both of them beside each other. If I write down 8 to 42, well, you will see all the states starting from row 8 to row 42. Okay, so and with all the columns front of it, right? Or another example. Okay, so this is the way we show the states or rows with all the columns. Okay, remember that we have 50 states in this file. Means we have 51 rows, including the header. Remember this. I'm going to copy this information here. Okay, and another information, index starts with 0. So the first index is index 0. Remember this. Okay, the next step, we want to show the statistical information. Show a quick statistics of the data frame. How? I'm going to write down data set dot describe, and remember we have parentheses front of this. So what you see here, we see the number of all the states, number of graduate percentage information we have, number of minority percentage we have, number of each of these rows, mean of percentage, graduate percent of graduation, this one for all of them. We have 25th percentile, and then we have 50%, which is median. Remember, 50% means 50 percentile means median. And we have the third quartile or 75 percentile. So this is the first quartile, second quartile or median, the third quartile maximum, right? A standard deviation also. Okay, so I have a question for you. Second participation question says, look at this kindergarten attendance. Look at this teacher qualification. Look at these two columns. Do these columns look good or look reasonable to you? Do they make sense? If yes or if no, you should explain why. Why you said yes, why you said no. Explain that. So this is the second participation point. So at this point you have second participation point. Okay, so now the next thing I'm going to talk about transpose matrix. Just imagine the data set we have. This data set is a matrix of rows and columns. And then if we want to transpose this matrix, what that means all the columns go to the row, all the rows go to the column. So instead of rows, we will see all the columns name. Instead of columns name, we will see the rows name. We can also transpose this data set like a matrix transpose. How? We write down data set dot T. So now imagine all the columns are here, and then informations also inverse. Pay attention. You can compare this with the first data set we have, original one, and then you will realize what I said. You have all the 50 states here, right? And then now it says 5 rows multiply 50 columns. Okay, so this was another information we can get from a data set. We can also sort our data set by an axis. We can write down data set dot sort underline index underscore index, and then we can choose axis 1, and then ascend. Actually you should write down like this: ASCENDING equal false. Look what happens. All of these will be in order. If I had, for example, A, D, C, H as our column name, it will organize them as A, C, D, then H. Ascending is false. So it will organize all the columns name for us and reorder the columns. Okay. Next one we are going to talk about is sorting by values of a column. So I want to sort the values, and I'm going to choose one column. Let's say I'm going to choose minority percentage, and then I'm going to put that here. So remember, the argument is by. You can choose a column's name. So what happens? It will organize all the data set based on minority percentage, which is from minimum now to maximum. It will reorder all the rows for me and will put the row that has the minimum minority percentage first, and then row with maximum minority percentage last. Okay. The next thing we want to talk about is using labels for, what did I do here? Find and replace. Okay, so probably I chose Control F, and that's why it's finding, it's showing this box to find a word and replace it by another word. Control F. Okay, so that was just an accident, but that was a good accident. Now you know how to find and replace words. Okay, we are going to use labels for getting a cross section. We want to choose 2 columns and all the rows. How? We write down data, data set dot LOC bracket colon comma another bracket. I'm going to choose graduate percentage. I'm very sorry. Okay, graduate percentage, comma, and let's say region. Why not? Okay, another column, region. I could just choose one column. Okay, let's see what happens here. So I chose 2 columns by their name, right? And then I made an array. I could add another column like this and write down the name of the column's name, right? I could remove this and have just one of them, right? Okay, what this means? This means from the beginning to the end of rows. So we have first argument, which is row, the second argument, which is the columns. So this says all the columns, this says just these 2 rows. Oops, what did I say? This says all the rows, this says just these 2 columns. Okay, so let's copy this, paste it here. I'm going to just choose this one. See, all the rows, just one of them, right? I didn't need bracket anymore. Why? Because I'm not making array. I just have one element to choose, right? Choose one column. And then note, we don't need bracket. Correct? Okay, so what else? I'm going to choose a state now. Let's say Alabama to, let's say, Florida. I hope I'm writing them correctly. So what it does, it shows the row from Alabama to Florida, from here to Florida here, right? And then I'm going to choose region, right here. I can say now show both region and what was the last column? Let's go here, teacher qualification, right? This one, and then highlight this, shift, and what's that? Quotation. Let's see what happens if this quotation is different from this quotation. Nothing happens. Look, nothing happened. We could do this. Okay, so this is about choosing rows and column using LOC, right? Let me write it down here for you. Using LOC, dot LOC. Okay, so now the other thing I'm going to use ILOC. Let's see what ILOC does. Data set dot ILOC. Now I'm going to choose 3 here. Let's see what we see here. We see some numbers here, values here. We see all the variables here, right? All the variables are here. And then we see name of the state here. So what's the relation between these 3 and this state? If Alabama is the first state and index is 0 for this, the index for Alaska is 1, 2, 3. So this is the index for this state, right? Okay, so which is the 4th state in the data set? Okay, remember you could use any other numbers, right? As long as it's between 0 to 50 and we are following the indexing. Oh, actually, let's see what is index 50. Well, I received error. Why? Because I have 50 states, right? If I have 50 states, if the first state's index of first state starts from 0, so the index of last state is 49, right? I'm going to write as a note. We have 50 states. Index of the first state is 0 and index of the last state is 49. If I try to display the information of index 50, I will receive an error because we don't have index 50 in our data set. Okay, so that was about the indexing. Yeah. Okay, so the next thing we are going to talk about is rows and columns, kind of boundaries. Means starting from a certain to a certain end. Dot using ILOC. Let's say state 3 to index 3 to index 5, and then column 1 to column 3. So this is what you will see. 3 to 5, we have index 3, index 4, 5 is not included, 5 is not included, and column with index 3 is not included. Okay, so these are a good note. You should always read all the comments I make front of the code. So another way to get specific rows and columns, you can write down dataset dot ILOC, and then the first argument for rows, I'm going to choose, for example, row 0, row 4, row 8, and then for column also I'm going to just show row 0 and 4. Let's have one here because I'm choosing 0. Okay, so what happens? Just index, only index 1, 4, 8, only rows with index 1, 4, and 8, and only columns with index 0 and 4. This is more kind of specific selection. And also I'm going to use data set dot ILOC 1 and 1. What this shows? This shows only one cell with row index 1 and column index, let's choose this 3 or 4, 3, and let's just choose 12, 13 here, for example. So I'm going to use 13. Okay, make your mind here. Good. Okay, so cell with index row 13 and column 4, index 4 is 0. So this column is 1 to the last. Okay, I remove this mistake. Column 1 to the last is kindergarten attendance, right? So we see it's just 0, 1, 2. That's why we have 0. Okay, so three last things for this one. Actually, we'll talk about that later in the next video.